All right, we are recording. What's up, everybody? Welcome back to another podcast of the Scientific Outdoorsman. This is a podcast dedicated to understanding the ins and outs of wildlife science and how we can use that information to make ourselves more effective hunters, fishermen, or conservationists. My name is Mark Barton. You may have seen me on YouTube channels like Swamp and Stomp and Mark Goes Outside, and I'm joined by Cody Eggenberger and Matt Fuchsia. We are a bunch of PhD ecologists. Well, I guess Cody is soon to be a PhD
Almost.
ecologist. He's almost there. And so basically, the premise of this podcast, if you're new to it, is in every episode, we will dive into a single wildlife research study. And today, we are diving into the science of yet another charismatic large predator. But this time, we're talking about Puma concolor, aka the mountain lion. And we're going to be talking about their population structure in Colorado and how hunting impacts that population and whether this gives us insights to how we should be managing them. So this was a super long paper, and we're going to gloss over a lot of details. Like it's like a 40-page paper. If you want to read the paper, you can find all the papers that we discuss at the link down in the description, and you can read it for yourself. But we're going to try and hit all the most important points in this podcast. And like I said, this is a brand new podcast, so make sure that you like and subscribe or follow or click whatever the buttons are that you need to click on the platform that you are listening on. Before we dive in, I just have a couple sort of current events or announcements that I want to make. I already mentioned this in the last episode, but for those of you who didn't listen to that one, there's a small game hunt coming up being organized by Backcountry Hunters and Anglers Florida chapter and the American Daughters of Conservation Florida chapter. And since the American Daughters of Conservation are involved, women are very much welcome to this event. I mean, they're always welcome, but in this one specifically, we really encourage you to bring your daughters, your girlfriends, your wives, any ladies in your life. It'd be great to get them out there in the outdoors. This event sort of starts with a safety briefing. We then go out and hunt. Then we have a skinning and butchering workshop, a wild game lunch, which is provided by your hosts, and then there's also some awesome raffle prizes. I guess I should say the date. It's going to be February 16th at the Upper Hillsboro Wildlife Management Area, and you can find all the details at the link down in the description. All right. Once again, FWC is still looking for written comments from people regarding the potential black bear hunt that is going to be decided on in May. You can send your comments to bearcomments@myfwc.com. And as part of the upcoming February FWC Commission meeting at the FSU Student Union on February 26th and 27th, BHA, Backcountry Hunters and Anglers, is hosting a pint night at the Proof Brewing location in the Student Union after the first day of the commission meeting. So there's likely going to be a raffle, but we don't really know what it's going to be yet. But we hope that you'll come out and hang out, at least with me. I don't think Cody's going to be able to make this one, but we can talk about hunting, conservation, all the good stuff. That's all the announcements I got. Matt, I think you maybe had one.
Yeah. So I mentioned this last week too, but we've got here in Colorado, we've got our local chapter of the uh, National Wild Turkey Federation. We're the Black Canyon Longbeards, and we have our first ever banquet coming up. It's going to be in a couple months in March. Just pulling up the actual date. It's going to be March 29th at the Montrose Elks Lodge, and we'll be sending out more information there. It's going to be a great time, great opportunity to meet other turkey hunters and just have a nice meal, and probably going to have some raffles going off, and look forward to seeing y'all there.
Sweet. All right. Should we get into this paper?
Yeah, let's do it.
All right.
So I selected this paper because mountain lions have been a hot topic, and state of Colorado here for probably about the past year, with Proposition 127 being on the ballot, which was a ballot measure to eliminate the hunting of mountain lions, bobcats, and lynx here in Colorado. Now, lynx are federally endangered, so it really wouldn't do anything there because you already can't hunt those. And then it's also something where advocates wanted to ban the trophy hunting of mountain lions, although trophy hunting is already banned in the state, and anyone who harvests a mountain lion is required to prepare the meat for consumption, human consumption. So the ballot measure, it did fail by a vote of 55.5% to 45.5%. And I also found it interesting that there are only 6 out of 64 counties in Colorado where the majority of voters in that county were in support of the ballot measure. 4 of those 6 measures were in the Denver metropolitan area. So, just this really concentrated area where pretty much almost all of those votes are coming from. And then the rest of the state was really largely against this measure. But the advocates for the proposition are still pushing for changes to management and hunting regulations and practices. There's a lot of emotion and there's a lot of strong feelings from both sides. But they're still pushing to look for ways to end these hunting practices. So I chose this paper in part because it's the study area is about 30 minutes from where I'm currently sitting here in Colorado, but also because it looks at what does the hunting effects have, what do the hunting effects have on the Colorado mountain lion population based on this one national forest area.
I think just building off what you were saying, like this is becoming like this really political thing. I think it's really important to mention that like we all have emotions about this, like you said, on both sides, but we at least recognize that emotion doesn't have a place in management, and it should be science based, and that's really the goal of most of these commissions. And so looking at the science is just so important for making these decisions, and that's kind of the point of what we're doing here.
Yeah, and I will say, like one thing, and Cody and I were talking about this before we logged in, like we were kind of surprised by the it's almost limited, the amount of information that there's research that looks into really like how much hunting is sustainable for these animals, and that's what this study really looked at. And what I mean there is when you have populations that are below their carrying capacity, meaning like the most amount of organisms that population can hold, that population is going to be in a state of growth, right? It's going to be growing till it hits that carrying capacity. And the idea there is while that population is at that growth level, you can harvest some of those animals and maintain a stable population if you don't harvest too many, right? And so that's kind of what all of hunting
Basically
is all about.
Creating a new carrying capacity by sort of increasing the mortality rate.
And just allowing the population to stay in that growth zone, right? And so it's something where you have by not hitting that carrying capacity, you maintain sufficient resources for the population to really thrive with the organisms that are left there. And so I think that to me was kind of the idea behind this, and that a lot of the advocates for the Proposition 127, the mountain lion hunting ban with the other animals, they'll say how you don't need the hunting to have these populations regulated because they'll self-regulate. And if you think about it, like all animal populations self-regulate because all animal populations were around before people were around. And so it's just thinking about how these populations are going to be maintained moving forward, especially now with people on the landscape.
Right.
That's what really this paper dived into. Go ahead.
But what I think also is important to keep in mind is like the story with these pumas is just like the same story with pretty much all large predators in the world. And that's pretty much that they were hunted to near extinction in the 1900s because they were seen as a pest. They were seen as a dangerous animal. They were taking out cattle. They were, threatening human life. So people just sort of got rid of them. And then suddenly people were like, oh, wait, we've almost gotten rid of these things completely. This is bad. And so now they're being managed for consumptive use, but also to reduce negative interactions. And those negative interactions, can include ungulate predation, because we value our elk, our deer. These are animals that we enjoy hunting. And if you let the population of these predators sort of get out of control, then that has a negative impact on those prey species. There's cattle depredation, there's vehicle collisions, and public safety. And so all of these things sort of like play a role in these decisions. And those things didn't exist back when they were self-regulating. So just the fact that humans are here sort of changes the name of the game. We have to kind of regulate these animals to meet the requirements that sort of society has imposed.
Yeah, and we really do need to dive into this paper because it is a doozy. But just building off of that, because you raised a good point there, it's when these populations self-regulate, there's going to be a lot more variance, right? They change a lot more. So the mountain lion population, it's going to increase a lot, and then you're going to have that population increase until it hits that carrying capacity that we're talking about, which is the maximum amount of individuals that the area can sustain. And that usually happens when they don't have enough food to sustain that number. That food is usually the first resource to become limited. It's food and the habitat for shelter and things like that. So in this case, the food is the deer and the elk and like you said, the ungulates, and then it can become livestock and pets. And the advocates for this measure also look at California as an example of a population where mountain lion hunting has been banned. And if you look at the deer population in that state since mountain lion hunting was banned, it's just plummeted. Before, like in I think it was 1970s, estimates of deer population was about 2 million, which that might have been too high. I don't really know. I didn't look into it for that. Not that the estimate was high, but just that number of deer in that state might have been at that carrying capacity level where those deer are starting to have some issues. Now it's less than 450,000. Hunting success is down to 15%. Colorado here, we're at like 40%. And hunting is a huge component of the Colorado, the economics of the state. There's a lot of people that come into the state for that. It's a large part of the culture. There's entire counties that are dependent on it. And so if you have mountain lion populations that just start to grow unchecked, only checked by the population of those animals, that's going to have a huge effect on the whole hunting community and the economy to a large extent of the state of Colorado. So with that in mind, let's dive into this paper and look at how mountain lion hunting actually is affecting the population of mountain lions here in Colorado. So, Cody, actually, Mark, did you want to dive into the methods of this one?
Oh yeah, I guess we did agree I was going to do that. So yeah, basically for this this study, they were focused on an area which I'm probably going to mispronounce. Uncompahgre, the Uncompahgre Plateau, which like Matt was saying is like right by his house. And so in this area, they went about tagging these cats, and I just thought it was super cool, like the way they described the way they're doing this tagging.
Sounds so awesome, yeah.
I mean, it just sounds like the most ridiculous field day I could possibly imagine. Like they're going out there with trained tracking hounds, and they're essentially hunting the pumas to tag them. Like they're doing everything that houndsmen are doing to hunt these cats. But then once the hounds like tree the cat, they then, instead of shooting it with a lethal shot, they shoot it with a tranquilizer, and then like a bunch of guys get underneath it with a net and like catch it as it falls out of the tree, and then as soon as it hits the ground, they're like restraining it, because it's probably still like sort of partially awake and trying to kill them. And then the thing that I thought was the coolest, like if it doesn't fall, like if it gets caught in the tree, like when it passes out, someone will climb up the tree and attach a rope to one of its legs and then push it out of the tree and then lower it down. So like, I mean, not that this like affects the data or whatever, but I just thought it was like super cool the way they're tagging these animals.
And I will also just note real quick, they did have caution when they were doing this. If they said if a mountain lion seemed to be in a dangerous position, they didn't tag it. But that was also an important part of the study because they're still making notes of those individuals,
Yeah.
but they were talking about how that could affect the number of mountain lions that they track.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Like for instance, they're in a tree that's like next to a cliff.
yeah.
Like shoot the dart and the thing jumps out of the tree off a cliff. That would not be good. So they,
Right.
they used their best judgment on those situations. But anyway, so they put these GPS collars on the cats, and those GPS collars were pinging 4 times a day, year round, for the entire study period, which extended from 2004 through 2014. And then there was what they called the hunting manipulation. That area was open to hunting before the study. So in 2003 and before that, there was hunting there. They then initiated a 5-year prohibition on hunting in the area, so that they could see how the population would sort of recover or change after hunting pressure stopped. And then that was then again followed by 5 years of hunting pressure once again to see how the population might change when that pressure was reapplied. So during that treatment period, the second 5 years, they had an initial quota set for 15%, which based on their counts during the reference period was 8 cats. And then after the first 3 years, when they had kind of noticed a decline in the population, they decided to adjust that to 11% of the population, which was 5 cats. Oh, and it's important to mention that when we're talking about these percentages, we are talking about independent cats. We're not talking about cubs that are following mamas around. So either adult females or adult males that are independent of their mother.
And they said that adults were anything over about 2 years old, which is what is about the age that mountain lions mature in this area and also more broadly. And below that, there are subadults. So you have cubs that are like less than a year, subadults 1 to 2 years, and then the adults beyond that. I think the subadults, because they're immature, they're harder to identify sex.
Yeah, I mean, I imagine so. I've never had to identify the sex of any kind of puma. And it's worth mentioning that the hunters in the study were following the same regulations as the rest of the state, so they kind of applied the same regulations that would apply in other units, but they needed to apply for a special permit that was free, and this allowed them to track hunter pressure and hunter harvest and everything throughout the period. So with this in mind, their hypotheses were that under this 15% quota, that the mortality that was caused by hunting was going to be compensated by a reduction in other causes of mortality, so natural mortality, or for instance, like vehicle collisions. That there would be an increase in reproduction rates and an increase in recruitment of young animals, and that would sort of replace the mortality caused by hunting. Yeah, I think that's pretty much all I got on the methods.
I'll just build one more thing. So mountain lions can really wander. They had a note that I think it was like subadult males can go like some ridiculous number of miles, or they can have like this huge home range. And so that home range is much larger than the study area that this area was looking at. So even though hunting was limited in those first 5 years, and there was that quota in the study area in the second set of 5 years, these mountain lions were moving in and out of that study area. And so, it might be that reference period where you can't hunt in the area, but mountain lion might move off and get shot, in the adjacent game unit.
But they did point out though that the collared ones were protected during the reference period, even outside of that area. So they're like, they kind of mentioned this in the discussion, but there's sort of inflated survival rate because of that. Because typically, like you said, they're moving across these lines. These lines are there to make it easy for humans to identify the lines of where they can and can't hunt within a unit, but the animals don't care. Um, so there was, a little bit of sort of an inflation of survival during that reference period, and it's important to keep that in mind when we're talking about how the populations went up and down.
And the other thing they did that I thought was really cool was they surveyed the hunters to find more about what the hunter experience was like. Did the hunters use dogs? Were the hunters selective? Whether they wanted to harvest a bigger mountain lion, if they were male or female, kind of what they experienced in terms of tracks and stuff like that. Because so the hunting season goes from I think it's like end of November through March, so it's middle of winter, and you have snow on the ground. So that's how they're tracking these animals largely.
Which sounds super fun. I mean, not just for pumas, but like I've always wanted to go and track deer in the snow. It just sounds so cool.
Yeah, I guess you don't do that too much in Florida.
Yeah, no, we can track them in the mud. Our winter time, all the water dries up and it's just mud everywhere. So you could.
We're about to get a snowstorm in North Florida, and the governor was the first one in the country to address the Gulf of Mexico as the Gulf of America, apparently.
Wow.
So that might actually be a thing. I don't know. One more thing. I want to be the tattooer. I want to be the cougar tattooer.
Oh yeah.
They got little tattoo numbers on their ears as well, just in case those collars fell off, or that. I think they also got ear tagged as a last resort. To know
make sure that they weren't recapturing. Yeah. Because I think they said they captured about 250 mountain lions, but they had like 440 capture events, so they were getting some recapture of these guys.
I guess we're going into the results already.
Yeah.
It's about that time. It's about that time. So.
Well, it can be.
Yeah.
All right.
Move along.
So, like we've been saying, this is like 5 papers in one. So I'll go quick through like the main kind of results. Generally, going from the reference period, again, like that's the 5 years no hunting, to the treatment period, all of those population demographic metrics or population dynamic metrics went down. So in the hunting period, so that the adult male and adult female survivor was higher in that reference period than the treatment period when hunting was allowed. Same for the subadult males. The subadult female survival rate was just about constant between those 2 5-year periods. Cub survival, they found, was, of course, best explained by the fates of the mothers, because those cubs do depend on the mom. All right, what else? The age shifted younger from the reference to the treatment years. So when there was hunting, the general age of the population you said we can call it the Unk. People call it the Unk.
Yeah, the Unk Plateau, or just the plateau, yeah.
Okay. It shifted a little bit younger. They did see some philopatry, so animals that were born there, or cubs that were born there, grew up to subadult adult stage. Some of them did say, some did disperse crazy distances, like Matt was saying. I think one went to like Montana.
I think I saw southern Wyoming might have been.
Was it? Maybe it was Wyoming, but insane distances. But they did see some of these cubs being retained and staying in the Unk.
One thing I'll just point out real quick, because I thought this was kind of cool. So it wasn't any difference between the reference period and the treatment period, but about 25% of cubs emigrated from the study area, which means like they just got out of there before, and so that was that's a quarter of the population that's moving to different areas.
More likely, that's a good point. It's more likely to be those males getting out of there too, right?
Yeah.
And we kind of talked about this when we were talking about the fawn survival rates in one of the last podcasts. But remember I was talking about the salmon having this genetic predisposition to disperse. like these kinds of things like make me wonder like if that's something that we see in a lot of different animals. Like what the heck makes them go, you know what, I'm out of here. I'm gonna walk, 1,000 miles, versus the other ones that are like, you know what, I like this spot. I'm gonna stay right here.
Yeah.
Kind of interesting, like what drives that. I have
Yeah.
no idea.
Just touching on that, it's just it drives genetic diversity, right? It drives mixing among populations, and that just allows these populations to be so much more resilient. So I think that's probably a large part of it is those behaviors, those migrating behaviors, those dispersal behaviors can really
Yeah.
be supportive of a whole population.
Well, what's really interesting about that too is, they touch on this in sort of the introduction of the paper, is that um, once upon a time we looked at mountain lions as like subpopulations in different regions, but then after genetic studies became possible, it turned out that there's actually no real genetic difference between them, and so they just kind of got lumped together into one species. And even the Florida panther, this is like an argument that sort of is ongoing. There's no genetic differentiation between the Florida panther and other puma species, although once upon a time there was, because it had sort of been separated from the rest of the population. But since we've been bringing in mountain lions, cougars specifically from the Texas region, to interbreed with them, that those genetics from the rest of the population are now mixed into the Florida population, and so they're technically not genetically distinct anymore. So a lot of people are arguing that like they should be delisted because of that, but that obviously is a little different in Florida because their population is still separated. So it's the only like breeding population that is like separate from the rest. But hopefully, I'm getting to a point here, I promise. Hopefully, at one point or another, when they expand back to their historic range in Florida, that population will rejoin the rest of the United States population, and it will sort of become one big population again, which I think would be a massive success story for the recovery of the Florida panther. I'm on a tangent here. We're not talking about Florida panthers. Let's get back to Colorado.
Well, I will say, I think one thing that I read in this paper is that I'm looking it up now. I think the Florida panther, like you said, is the only mountain lion population like on the eastern half of the country, like the one that's like there's production of mountain lions. There's every once in a while you'll have a mountain lion from like the Dakotas or something that'll wander over to the East Coast, but the Florida panther is the only one that's like an actual population. Yeah, and so I thought that was really cool. I didn't realize that.
Well, yeah, and I think you guys can correct me if you know better, but I'm pretty sure once upon a time mountain lions were prevalent all over the East Coast, like the whole country, but we've just kind of extirpated them because the East Coast is apparently where everybody wants to be, and there's just like tons of humans, and humans are bad for Puma populations. So
yeah, in Vermont there were the catamounts. That's the University of Vermont's mascot is a catamount, which is there used to be mountain lions there.
Oh, cool.
So back to results.
Yeah,
sure.
I took us on a tangent.
Do you guys want to go? Yeah,
I wanted to add something to the results. Something I thought was really interesting is like I didn't realize. I don't know if you guys were aware of this, but I didn't realize just how much like intraspecific mortality, like ills, are happening within these populations, and they touched on that, which I thought was really interesting. So they were saying that there are 2 times more during the reference period. There was 2 times more kills or deaths of pumas, independent pumas, from interspecific kills. So like from one puma killing another puma, that happened twice as much as humans killing those pumas. And keep in mind that there was no hunting at that time, so the humans killing pumas was vehicle collisions or depredation events. Um, and and of those kills, there was 3 times more females being killed by other pumas than males. So I can only imagine that it's like dominant males that are just like killing females for reasons
Yeah.
I don't
Well,
understand.
so infanticide is a huge thing with mountain lions too, right? Where the males they'll try to eat the cubs. And so what I can see happening is, mama's trying to protect her cubs, gets in between this big male and her cubs, and next thing maybe it's not like to kill the female or to eat the female, but it's just something where whether it's wounds or something like that, or he does just kill her on the spot to get to those cubs. I could see that being a big part of it because infanticide rates can be really high with these
Yeah.
animals too.
Yeah, so I just think that's really interesting. I mean, really, these big cats, they're just bullies. But then like when we switch to the treatment period, now we're seeing that hunters typically select for larger males, and so we're seeing an increase in the number of males that are killed. And from an ecological perspective, that is obviously like more desirable because females are far more valuable from an ecological perspective because they're the ones that are carrying the babies, and sort of the growth rate is limited by the female. Um, so with those numbers, you'd hope that the number of females sort of left behind to reproduce would be higher because the males aren't killing them. But they found that that wasn't the case, which was a little unexpected. And I guess that kind of segues us into discussion.
I was just going to say that building one more thing on the population dynamics of so during the reference period at the very beginning, the population was at its lowest, and the male female ratio for the independent ones, so subadult and adult, was about 1-to-1. And then that population grew like 150% in 5 years, and the female ratio got even larger. So there were more females than males. And then the largest the population could get was at the start of the hunting period. And at that point, there was a lot of females to males. By the end of the hunting period, that ratio grew even more because, like you're saying, these hunters are selecting males more often. And so that was just something where I thought that was, pretty cool. And the one last thing I want to get into with the results was the Puma hunting perspectives, where most hunters use dogs, and only those that use dogs were successful. And then 84 to 97% of the hunters across the hunting period identified themselves as being selective for either male or female or larger pumas, and there was a 2-to-1 male to female harvest rate. So even though there's so many more females and like the hunters are interacting with females more, they're finding the female tracks more, they're so much more selective for these males, which, like you said, and like we've been saying since the beginning, like that's great for this population because you really need the females to keep these populations stable, right? If you take out a bunch of females, it's going to drop the population size and reduce the population from growing that much more effectively.
Well, yeah, and then on top of that, like I was saying, those males that they're taking out, those are the ones that are more than likely going to kill females themselves. So like by selectively taking out males when you're hunting, you're giving that population an opportunity to bounce back because there's more females left. With that said, like you said, most of these hunter or all of the hunters that were successful were using dogs, and it's simply because these animals are so hard to catch up with. They're so cryptic. They don't want to be around people, but these dogs are trained in doing this, and they do like an incredible job. And the simple fact that when the researchers need to capture these animals, this is the exact same thing they do. And most of these researchers, they don't train their own dogs. Like, guess what? They go and find houndsmen that hunt cougars and have them track for the researchers so that they can, so that they can put their tags and everything on them. And I think it's also worth mentioning that like the amount of people that are hunting mountain lions, it's a very small like subset of the hunting community. Like, and I'm sure that these like anti-hunting groups like would love to paint this picture of like, you know, thousands of like hunters going out there with their dogs to chase these cats and like kill them. But no, we're talking about, 5 and 8 pumas being killed in this entire region over the course of like half a year, and the number of hunters that are actually participating in that is relatively small.
Mm-hmm.
But that said, those hunters actually play like a pretty important role in helping us get the data that allows us to manage their populations. But also, that small group of hunters is also sort of the only tool that the management agencies have that they can control, the mortality rates on, because everything else, like, pumas getting hit by cars, or a farmer that sees one chasing their cattle and shoots it, like it's a lot harder for them to control that. But these hunters, they can set a quota. They know exactly how many are going to be killed, and so that small subset of like mountain lion hunters are a really important asset for the management agency.
And that it
So
comes back to, what the ultimate goal of a population is, right? Like we were saying at the start, yes, mountain lion populations can maintain themselves, but they're not going to be, I guess, what we'd call stable, right? They're going to be fluctuating a lot. They're going to be responding to the number of ungulates and other animals that they can feed on in the surrounding area. The more food there is for them, the more mountain lions you're going to have. And so it's something where hunting has been used as this management tool to keep that population stable. It's controlling, it's putting a hand on a valve, so you don't have just like this kind of somewhat random change in the population size. Whereas you can just say, okay, we're going to keep the population here. We're going to see how it does. If it needs to get changed, we'll adjust the hunting levels. So that way we can say, okay, we want more pumas. We'll increase hunting regulations. We'll see an increase. And so it's this very controlled way to manage a population that allows that population to thrive, but also allows the other populations in the area to thrive, right? Because if you have mountain lion populations that just explode, now you're going to have to look at how the elk population, the mule deer population, how those are changing, and then likely restrict the number of tags that are sold for those animals in response, so you don't wipe out those populations. And so it just allows a much more, I guess, like, I don't know what the right word here is, but like, it's just a lot more of a stable, and it is very much adaptive.
Well, they talk about that too. Like they, when they get to their implications for management, they talk about that what's really necessary to manage puma populations is adaptive approaches. In order to do that, you need to be constantly monitoring the populations of the pumas, the populations of their prey species that you also care about, and so they sort of mentioned that like hunting, it is a very effective tool for reducing that population. But maintaining that sustainable harvest is a lot more difficult, and it requires like accurate data to be constantly collected. And so and they mentioned, if you're managing an area where you don't have that data constantly available, then quotas should be more conservative, because it is easy to knock that population down through hunting.
Right.
Um,
Do you mind pulling up figure 12? Although maybe before that, because there was another figure, I think it was figure 6, that really summarizes to me the main results of this. So figure 6 on page 17, on the bottom of page 17.
Tell me.
And
was that it? No.
Yes, that is it, on the bottom left there. Yeah, if you can zoom in for us. So there's two different panes to this. Okay. So the top pane, so you see the two different colors, the blue and the red, and the x-axis. So on the bottom here, you have the year. So the first 5 points are going to be the reference period. The second 5 points are going to be the treatment period where there's hunting allowed. And then the y-axis, to the left side, is the number of mountain lions, individual mountain lions. So these are the subadults and the adults. And then the colors represent the males and females. Females being red, males being blue. And so you see there's just this large increase in the mountain lion population here in that first 5-year period. That's the reference period. There's no hunting going on. The population is increasing, just like we're saying. You let go of that control. And then at the 6th year, so this is the first treatment year, the first year that hunting's allowed, that's when the population is at its highest. And if you look, the female population, so these are subadult and adult females, it kind of stabilizes after that, right? And you see the same thing in the figure below where it separates things out into adults, subadults, cubs. That's why there's a lot more points. But it's again, this is showing that selectivity of the hunters where they're really just looking for the males. And so overall, when you combine the number of mountain lions, males and females, during that treatment period, the population declined. So, the objective of this study was to find a level of hunting that would allow the mountain lion population to remain stable. So what they found is that the hunting levels that they allowed, whether it was 15% or even 11% at the end, was too high for the population to remain stable, and it led to a decrease in the population size. And then if you don't mind scrolling down, go ahead, yeah.
What I think is also important to mention, though, is like how quickly this population rebounded when hunting stopped. And so that's important to keep in mind too, is that like if they notice the population is maybe starting to get a little bit too low, maybe a few more pumas have been taken out of the population, than they were expecting, because obviously there's a number of sources of mortality that they can't control. So like let's say the numbers get a little lower than they want, well, they could stop. They could put a quota of 0 for a year or two and allow that population to sort of rebound. So again, this adaptive management approach is really like the way to go about this. And we're talking about such small numbers, total, that they can rebound relatively quickly.
Yeah, and that's a great point about that adaptive management. And Colorado Parks and Wildlife is doing a phenomenal job at that, because they are looking to see, what are the number of mountain lions that are getting harvested each year, and then they're also looking at other causes of death and looking at just what's the total reduction in the mountain lion population, and then they adjust their quotas in response to that. And so they just had a reduction in the quotas because I think it was this past year they saw there was a little bit of an increase in the number of females that were harvested. So they said, all right, you know what, the next year we're going to have fewer quotas. You know what the hunter response to that was? Fantastic. We don't want to wipe these animals out. We want to preserve a stable and a sustainable population size. And so it just shows that these animals are being managed in a way that allows for a healthy population, and it's in a way that everyone, hunters and the commission, it's in a way that they all agree with. And
it's a perfect example of the American model of conservation. And we've talked about this before, but nobody cares about the future of this population more than the people that depend on it, that enjoy pursuing it. Like these hunters want to make sure that this lifestyle that they have can be continued for generations to come. I mean, and literally, like I'm not a houndsman, but I know people who run dogs, and it's a lifestyle. It's something that they literally build their lives around. That the amount of time that goes into training those dogs. They sort of always have sort of like a pack of dogs. So there's like puppies coming in that they're training, and then they have their older dogs that are like well trained. Like it consumes their entire life, and they want to continue to live that life. So they have to take care of this population.
And another thing to build on this, so hunting with dogs has been one of the largest controversial points with the mountain lion hunting, seen as like an unfair chase, and it's not traditional hunting in the sense that it's not just the hunter versus the animal. And while that is true that you are adding this advantage to the hunter, it's almost a necessary advantage to allow this selective hunting, right? Because like you were saying at the start, these mountain lions are so elusive that if you're just doing your traditional stalking style of hunting, you're going to have a lot lower opportunities for hunters to be selective. Also, when these dogs tree a mountain lion, that gives the hunters an opportunity to assess that individual. Is it a male? Is it a female? Is it an individual that I want to harvest? And most of the individuals that got passed up in this study were females. If you don't have dogs treeing these cats, you're going to have a huge increase, I imagine, in the number of females that are harvested. And
Yeah.
that's just awful for these populations. So, and I also think
Not
about it
to
as like,
mention, I think it's also important. I already said this before, but like people talk about how it's like inhumane to use dogs. Meanwhile, all the data that we're getting is being collected by using dogs. Like the scientists are using dogs as well to capture these animals. So I think it's a very hypocritical thing to say that it's not okay for hunters to do it, but it is okay for scientists to do it.
and it's also something where I'm thinking about like, the dogs, sure, they're going to cause some stress to that mountain lion, but that's a part of nature. Like these mountain lions are doing the same thing to everything that they're hunting, and it's something where that stress is momentary. That mountain lion is going to be fine. It's going to be much better off if he got shot. And so it's something where it if you paint the picture from a negative perspective, it can come off looking awful, And I think I saw somewhere that, the public perception of hunting mountain lions with dogs generally does have that kind of that negative perspective to it. Most people are against it. But when you think about how valuable that is for the population, if you are going to use hunting as this management tool, it's almost necessary, right? Because I mean, otherwise, you're just going to have so much greater concern for hunting these females that are so valuable for the population.
Yeah.
Can I play devil's advocate as the
Please
novice
do.
hunter here?
We're all
In
novice hunters when it comes to mountain lions.
Yeah, absolutely.
well, yeah, even more so here. Um, so every season there was every treatment year. Season closed by what it opened in like November and generally closed. Maybe the latest was January, early
Yeah, when the
January.
quota was filled. Yep.
The full season, if that quota wasn't met, was through March. Do you think if they had banned dogs, there would be a longer hunting period and those quotas would still get met? So offering more hunting opportunity? Um, just as a devil's advocate
I don't
thought.
think so. I mean, like Matt was saying, nobody was successful without dogs. There was like the only people who had success were those with dogs. So yeah, I mean, the season lasted what 4 months out of the 6 that it was potentially able to be open.
Not
Uh,
even.
yeah, so you extrapolate out those numbers. What's zero extrapolated? Like a success rate of zero. You can extrapolate that all you want. It's still zero. You can make it all year round, and maybe they'll harvest one. So I just don't think that that's an effective way to manage this population. And population management is the goal of what we're doing here. Like these these animals, like there is a need for them on the landscape. They have an ecological role. We could talk about trophic cascading and how they keep the ungulate populations in check, and because those populations are in check, that has an effect on the vegetation in the area. Like there's all kinds of effects that apex predators have throughout the food chain. So we don't want to remove them, but we definitely want to manage them because we want to keep those other populations around for people to hunt as well.
Mhm.
So if we are going to manage them, we really need the houndsmen. You can't do it effectively without them.
All right, can I make one more point on the results that I found interesting?
Matt, do you want
With
to tell your dog to go away?
That's not on my end. I don't think it's on my end.
what is it?
It sounds like a dog scratching at the door.
Oh, no, that's one of my cats. We took him to the vet, and he's going to the litter box up here that we have for him. Sorry. With the compensatory and additive effects of mortality, with like Matt was introducing the idea, if you release these density dependent drivers to the puma population, so you have some mortality, it frees up space for other pumas to fill those roles in the environment. It makes sense that if they're hunting males, they're reducing the population. There's room for females to move in, and maybe they have better fitness. maybe they reproduce more rapidly. They're getting their body back to reproductive state where they can support having another litter of kittens. So you would expect with hunting, potentially expect that those reproductive rates would go up, the litter sizes would go up because the female pumas would be in greater fitness. But I was kind of surprised they didn't see that.
Yeah.
Here they had average birth rate intervals were similar, treatment and control, and then litter sizes slightly decreased. I was kind of surprised by that. So I guess it seems like a lot of this is region specific for how best to adaptively manage your population of puma. That's kind of one of the main takeaways I got from this, but maybe that's not a metric that should be considered or weighted too much. There's not going to be those additive effect or the compensatory effects of mortality with hunting.
So, real quick, Mark, can you scroll down to figure 12 because that gets right at what Cody's saying here. And just for folks listening, so additive mortality means that a little bit more.
I can't see the numbers.
Two more pages.
Yeah, I guess I didn't really explain.
There you are, top right here. So before we dive into that figure, so additive effects of mortality means that you're going to have a decrease in the population size because the mortality is adding up. Compensatory means that even though you're removing some individuals from the population is able to compensate for that. It's able to account for that mortality loss, and the population is going to stable and maybe even increase a little bit. And that's what this figure here is shown on the right, where we have all these different populations of mountain lions. So there's UT is for Utah, WA is for the state of Washington, WY is for Wyoming, and then CO Colorado during different periods. And the red indicates a declining population, yellow means that the population is remaining stable, and black means that the population is increasing. And the y-axis is I think it's the percent harvest of the population. And so on the one extreme, you have 5% harvest at a population in Utah, and they saw that the population was increasing. So that's an example of that compensatory growth, where you have a harvest, but the population is still increasing. The other example where they saw that was in Wyoming, where they harvested 18% of the population, and the population was increasing. Right to the left of that, the red bar for the COUPSA, that's this study, where they had a target of 15% harvest rate, and that was a declining population. So that's where this shows it really depends on the environment that you're in. And that's why, this management really needs to be adaptive to understand what's going on in the population. The far right bar there, that's way above everything else. That's 44% mortality. That's that same Wyoming population that was increasing at 18%. So that's just an example of this adaptive management. You look to see what the level is that allows the population to remain stable. Go ahead, Mark.
I think another thing to keep in mind is that scale might be really important here. The scale at which you're measuring these populations, because we know that these animals can move great distances, and this Uncompahgre Plateau is like relatively small compared to a lot of the potentially the other areas that are being studied, and areas that these cats could be going to. So you might be losing cats to like immigration. You might be gaining some through immigration. Another scale to consider is like time. Like there might be sort of a lagged effect, and that compensation that they sort of predicted would happen might take longer, for us to see than the 5 years that they were doing this study. When you consider that 5 years, we're talking about like one generation of these cats. Like an adult cat's going to be 5 years old. So like, I don't know that you would necessarily be able to see that effect in such a short period of time. I feel like you might have to like do this for 20 years of no hunting and then 20 years of hunting. But the reality is getting the funding to do a study like that, not to mention 40 years is like an entire career. Like, it's just not realistic to have a study done at the scale that's needed to really understand like the dynamics here. And that, that's just one of the big problems that we run into with charismatic megafauna, is that like the populations are relatively small and the cost of researching them is really high. And so we just don't have a lot of data that we would love to have. So we have to work with what we've got.
Yeah. So that's a really good point with temporal and spatial scale. And this study was amazing. Like they had planes flying over to track on like a weekly basis. But I can't find it right now, but didn't they, to your point of scale, Mark, for this adaptive management kind of plan, it seems that needs to be implemented for pumas at a regional scale. Didn't they attribute some of this decline potentially to, so Matt, correct? So there's all these GMUs within a DMU, a data management unit. Is that what?
Data
Um,
analysis unit, I think they called it.
Yeah.
okay.
Yeah.
So maybe, didn't they say they attributed maybe some of that decline in the population within the UNC to higher harvest rates in the surrounding GMUs? So
Yeah. They
those
said
two.
I think it was
Yeah.
the overall the mortality rate was 22% for the
On
entire
average. Yeah.
on average for the entire data analysis unit. And so the data analysis unit is like you said, it's a larger area that includes several of these smaller units, and that scale is more representative of sort of the range of these animals. And so when you're looking at population dynamics, you really should be looking at like that larger scale. But obviously, to do a hunting manipulation like this, like that's going to be a hard sell to be like, hey, we're going to shut down this entire region to hunting. But it's a lot easier for them to sell that for this smaller portion. So yeah, I mean, again, this data is not going to be perfect, and it's going to be almost impossible to get perfect data on this. But so the point being, just because they didn't see what they expected doesn't mean that effect isn't real, but it just wasn't seen at this scale, I think.
And just building on that too, it's something where these results are still valuable, where they were able to see reduction in the population size, and even if that reduction is a little bit biased in the sense that it's what they were looking at, 15% was low, that just means that they're going to be more conservative with their management actions. They're going to select a value, a cutoff that's going to be more conservative to allow this population to remain stable. And so it comes back to just this idea of adaptive management, where you make an action and you see how the population responds. If it responds well, you hold with that. If it doesn't respond well, you change. And the state is doing that so well that the mountain lion population, even though mountain lion hunting has been allowed for years here, the population across the state has remained stable. That's the key point. It's what they're doing is working for maintaining a healthy mountain lion population in the state that doesn't start to grow out of control and start to affect the other animals that so much the state's hunting population is dependent on.
Yeah, so honestly, I don't think I could think of a better statement to end this thing on.
Well, I think one thing I will just kind of wrap things back to is, just thinking about this from the hunter perspective. Right now, hunting with dogs is allowed for mountain lions. And, if you have that capability, take advantage of that, because if it allows you to be more selective for harvesting males over females, that is so helpful for these populations. And so, from this hunter perspective, it doesn't seem like, there's any tips other than use dogs that we could give folks to help them with their success rates. So it's more just think about how you're hunting this population and be respectful of how the state is managing the population, because they really do care about these things as much as the hunters do, and want to keep these populations stable and healthy.
Yeah, you just made me think of something that, like, people do the same thing with bears. There are a number of states that allow you to run bears with dogs, and it's the same thing. They tree the bear, and then they sit there and like analyze the bear, and they're like, "Oh, yep, that's a big boar. Like, let's go ahead and harvest that one." Or, "Nope, that's a that's a female, or there's cubs around, whatever, really gives you time to make that decision. Whereas, a still hunt strategy, you just don't have that. So, I'm not saying we should or we shouldn't, but when we consider this Florida bear hunt, maybe that's something to keep in mind, that doing, allowing dog hunting of bears can really, make that management tool that much more efficient. So, just food for thought for those of you thinking about Florida bears as much as I am.
So next week, since we're already at our hour mark, do we want to stay on this mountain lion topic? I think it's it's a relevant season. If we're still in mountain lion season here in Colorado.
Well, how about we put it like this? We'll have a little vote, because we haven't done that in a couple of episodes. I think we already have a migratory bird paper sort of selected that we were going to do if we went back to that. Mm-hmm. So if we go the migratory bird route, we're going to go with the quail paper that Cody had selected. Or we can do another mountain lion paper. Who knows? We can get crazy and talk about Florida panthers too. So there's three options right there. How about we have the listeners vote on that? What do you guys think of that?
Yeah, I'll say for the second. So it's the quail paper, and then there's a mountain lion paper, some stuff I found on California. So we could do an assessment of, what does hunting look like, or what does the environment look like in California, where there's no hunting allowed of mountain lions, kind of as a follow-up or a comparison. Like you're saying, Mark, we don't have the ability to look at what 40 years of manipulations on Puma hunting would look like, but you can look to other states, to California, where there hasn't been hunting allowed now since I think like the 1990s. So long-term, assessment of what that looks like.
That's a great one. I want to talk about that one, because I have a feeling that it's going to paint a picture of how important it is to have mountain lion populations controlled. That's just my prediction.
So that's, it's not as valuable from a hunting perspective for hunters, because there's nothing there about what you can do to improve your hunting practices, but it's still just interesting to see what that looks like. And then for the Florida one, I know you mentioned the paper earlier on about the effects of mountain lions, or the Florida panther on like the deer population. Is that what you were thinking?
Yeah, there is a really cool paper that talks about and it's not just mountain lions. They also look at like bears and other predators, but they look at the effect of nocturnal predators, primarily Florida panthers, on how deer move and when they move. And so we did some discussions previously about like deer movement, moon phases, and all kinds of stuff like that. Well, this is just another perspective on that, looking at the effect of predators on deer movement.
Really cool.
Yeah.
Yeah. All right. That one's cool. Can I throw one quick fourth one? Because for us, quail season is over. I don't have the paper yet, but
it's not over in other states.
Right. For you and I, Mark.
Let's leave it at 3. We don't want to have too many selections, but keep the paper in mind that you're talking about. We'll throw it out there in a future one.
Fine. All right.
All right. Let's wrap this thing up. So
this next one's going to be all of us in person with Matt coming down.
You're right.
I think so.
You're right. It might be. We might all be in person. Matt's going to come down, so we're going to do an in-person podcast. So that'll be cool.
And by in person, we mean we're all going to be in the same room. It's still going to be virtual for everyone listening.
At night, drinking, not in the morning, drinking coffee.
Yeah. All right. So, okay. Leave a comment or vote if you're listening on Spotify on which one of those you want us to talk about in the next one. And with that, thank you guys for tuning in. Make sure you're subscribed, and we'll catch you in 2 weeks.
Take care, everyone. Thanks for listening.